particular trade. It's a probably the most dangerous trade, statistically speaking, to work in. And we decided to bring in OSHA and DOSH. And so OSHA will be presenting compliance assistance and a safety hazard overview, a little in-depth look at the standards and some other important information. And then of course, we have DOSH coming in to talk about an update on the proposed written trenching, excavation, and rescue plan. And so for today's speaker, we have a longtime friend, Adam Gerson, who is Compliance Assistance Specialist in the OSHA Boise area office. And Adam, it is great to have you on board today, and we are so interested to hear about all the amazing things that you put together. And hopefully things are going good out there in Idaho for you, and we are looking forward to hearing from you. And in addition, we have Blake Skoglund, which is the area director for the OSHA Washington office, and finally for DOSH, and I will give that announcement here right now, just so we know. We have Eric Smith, who is a safety technical specialist with the Division of Occupational Safety and Health here in Washington State. And so let's go back to Adam Gerson. And Adam, I'm going to give you control, sir. Sorry, it looks like I missed an A in your name there, buddy, but go ahead and have control.
Okay.
There you go, sir.
Okay, greetings, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Adam Gerson. I'm the Compliance Assistance Specialist currently for the OSHA Boise area office. And in a second, I'm going to be queuing up a PowerPoint presentation, and the area director for the state of Washington, Blake Skoglund, is going to be leading off on a couple of those slides. Before I put that up, though, I just want to give you a couple cautionary notes about my presentation. Okay, I'm going to be reviewing trenches and excavations, but this is a general hazard awareness PowerPoint on the topic. DOSH remains the agency with private industry jurisdiction in the state of Washington, so just keep that in mind. And this is not a competent person course. It should not be interpreted as such. So if you do want to take a competent person class and become a CP on a job site, make sure to reach out to your local resources in the state of Washington. So now I'm going to queue up the presentation here.
Rick Gleason and Cynthia Gross, you should turn your video off.
Okay, can you guys see the presentation here?
Yes, we can, Adam.
You can see it? Okay,
yep.
Excellent. All right, Blake, why don't you lead off and just tell me to advance the slides when you're ready to switch, okay?
Okay, yeah. Can everybody hear me? I'm going to try to do this without my headset, but if I need to put it on.
We can hear you fine.
Okay, perfect. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Blake Skoglund with the Washington area office, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about what's going on in Washington and in Region 10 in general before we hand it off to Adam for the substantive part of the presentation. So, Adam, you can go ahead to the next slide. Here's the OSHA disclaimer. We're going to hand out, I believe, make the presentation available. So if you want to read it, basically this is a compliance assistance presentation. You know, I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but it'll be available if you want to. Go ahead. So today, we're just going to cover sort of what's available compliance assistance-wise. Then Adam's going to talk about some accident investigations, go over trench and excavation hazards, some common OSHA citations, inspection protocol, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the trench NEP, and then I think I'm going to talk a little after that about the new heat NEP that just came out in the past month. Next slide. So in Region 10, we have the cooperative and state programs is your sort of go-to for any outreach. If anyone's interested in applying for voluntary protection or the VPP program, or creating an alliance or partnership with OSHA, or to collaborate on any outreach, you'll want to contact this office, and specifically Andrew Martinson. He's the new VPP and outreach manager for Region 10. He comes from the Boise office. He's also still in Boise as well. And then this office also handles our state plan monitoring of the state of Washington. For DOSH, they also cover Oregon OSHA and Alaska OSHA. And the Washington area office is involved in obviously monitoring L&I and DOSH, and I just want to say that you all are very lucky. You have one of the best state plan programs in the country for OSHA, and I really appreciate being able to work with DOSH as close as we do. Next slide.
Hang on.
Okay.
Okay.
So our office, first, just a little bit about me. I started in this position in September of last year. Dave Baker was the pretty long time area director, and he retired. Before this, I was in the Cooperative and State Programs office doing outreach and alliances. And then before that, I was in the national office in Washington, D.C. for about 12 years, and I worked in the Directorate of Construction, helping to write OSHA construction standards and provide guidance on those standards. OSHA, federal OSHA in Washington, our main jurisdiction when it comes to construction would be contractors and federal workers on most military installations, over tribal employers on reservations or trust land, and in the North Cascades, Olympic, and Mount Rainier National Parks. There could be some other areas, like if you are doing construction on a vessel, that would also be covered, but most construction in the state is going to be under DOSH's jurisdiction, but these are our most common places where federal OSHA has jurisdiction. We also cover all federal civilian employees and post office employees or employers. And then on the shipyards, our jurisdiction basically starts on the vessel, kind of at the gangway. And then we have jurisdiction within the first sort of 3 nautical miles. So on shore, for shipyards, it's DOSH. Within those 3 miles, it's OSHA. And then outside that, it would be the Coast Guard. So the shipyards definitely have a lot of regulators to work with. We also cover some of the other big ones with tribal employers. We cover all the casinos that are owned by tribes. And there's a few other areas in there that'll come up, but I don't think they typically have to do much with construction. So if anybody has any question about jurisdiction, or if you do work with DOSH and OSHA, you do need to know standards for both of them. Sometimes they're the same, but often they're not. So just give our compliance assistance team a call. Adam handles Idaho. We don't actually have a compliance assistance specialist in Washington per se, but the if you want to go back one slide, Adam, this you can either call my office, or this team should be able to help out or direct you in the right way if you have questions about jurisdiction, also in Oregon and Alaska, because they're a little different than Washington. So I think that's it. And at the end, if anybody has any questions, I don't know if we'll have time for those, but I should be able to answer them or point you in the right direction. So thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Blake. And now we're going to move on to my portion of the presentation, which goes over Boise compliance assistance activity, and then also the topic of the day, which is trenching and excavation. Out of our office, we distribute a monthly compliance assistance newsletter, and there's a slide here that shows the cover page for the most recent newsletter that we distributed. In this issue, we talked about our alliance with the Boise School District to distribute or to do OSHA 10s. We have resources for fall and trench stand downs. There are Spanish language resources. And also we do a photo of the month, which is typically from our Focus 4 material that's available on OSHA.gov. If you want to be added to our distribution list, you just have to send me an email that says send updates in the topic header, and you'd send it to gerson.adam@dol.gov. This is, these are a couple slides or a couple pictures from our OSHA 10 that we have at DTEC. That's the Dennis Technical Education Center, which is kind of like a trade school or a high school, as a student dressed up in an arc flash outfit. And on the left is Joe Pasalacqua, who is one of our consultants from Idaho Power, who did the electrical section for the OSHA 10. And on the right is one of the instructors, Professor Hazlitt. And without the contributions of the teachers, the volunteers in the community, and the authorized instructors, this program would not be. So we are very grateful for the community for contributing to this. And as of today, in about a year and a half or 2 years, we've trained about 200 students and at the high school level in OSHA 10s, and it makes them very marketable for downstream construction employers. These are just some generic internet photos of fall safety stand downs. Last week, we had our fall safety stand down events in Boise. Engineered Structures Incorporated, a large general contractor and one of the largest in the state of Idaho, had their event, and they had about 500 to 600 people, along with a fall demonstration. The area director for the Boise area office, David Kearns, spoke at the event, and he traditionally does, along with local dignitaries. And we're happy to be a part of this type of activity that takes place at one of our OSHA construction partners, that being ESI. For Focus Forum material, you're more than welcome to access our outreach training webpage and their presentations and related handouts for such material on fall hazards, struck by, electrical, and caught in or between. And you can access PowerPoint presentations, handouts, what have you, just anything to facilitate safety meetings or stand downs. That information is readily available to you, and we would encourage you to use it because it's free of use and it's visually oriented. Recently, we tried a beta called OSHA Mobile 5 out of our office, which basically amounted to doing MMS text demos from our office from a text generator called Simple Texting. And we created a phone number on the MMS platform, or the multimedia text platform. And the reason we did this is because current PDF and PowerPoint outreach messaging does not have customer feedback analytic loops built in. You know, you're just sending out push notification information, and you're not getting really good feedback on what customers feel about it. The OSHA website has resources that are not fully leveraged, meaning that there's tons of information that's already stored on the web, and we thought it would be useful to just provide links to this information through a series of links to your phone. And mobile workforces primarily use cell phones for information retrieval in 2022. So we wanted to do a demo where we would send out MMS messaging through OSHA Mobile 5 texts. Basically, the text amounted to 5 tips in occupational safety and health for stakeholders with web links and phone numbers. The intent was to distribute on the first and third Monday mornings of the month. And to opt in, you just have to email me to be on the direct distribution. Stakeholders are welcome to add demographic specific prefaces to the text that we send out for their secondary distribution. And PII, or personally identifiable information, is not something that we want to obtain. We just want you to be able to maintain your own stakeholder networks and to distribute information as need be. This is
Adam,
Adam, yes, sure.
Let me interrupt. Go back to that, the last slide. So everybody, I just want to tell you, I have participated in this text demo, and it is fabulous. It is really something that I think is worth getting on Adam's list to get these every month. It's very factual. It's very complete. It's got supreme great information, and I would highly recommend it. That's it.
I appreciate that, Brian. Like Bartles and James, I appreciate your support. So this is what the initial beta looked like. 5 links, very basic, scaled down, trench stand downs, fall stand downs, new heat influence program, an article on an employer that pled guilty for lying to us, and Focus 4 training material with the hyperlinks spelled out, sent in a text to your phone. Material that you could potentially use for safety briefings or to retrieve additional information as need be through your phone. Information on trench safety stand downs is widely available. It's on NUCA's webpage. Same for fall safety stand downs. OSHA has a huge page that has all of the resources to you. This enables you to just have the link to access the information. One cautionary note about this, though, is that cell phones or cell phone providers have been kind of like a mixed bag as to whether or not they accept the MMS text. So I'm currently working with a local company just to see if we can sort of figure out the bugs as to why that is. But anyway, this is the intent, just to provide you with basic information that you can use for briefings Nothing fancy about it, no graphics, just the links. At first and third Monday of the month. That's the idea. This is an example of an accident that OSHA has investigated in Idaho. This was a contractor that was erecting trusses to build an onion storage facility. So this was a framing site. The issues on this site were many. There were multiple causes of the collapse. And we're just putting this in here as an example of something that we would investigate out of our office. This was an accident I investigated a few years ago when I was still in compliance. The potential causes of the collapse were that they didn't have triangulation in their wall bracing. They overloaded their roof sheathing with OSB. They used a spreader bar that was not wide enough for 82-foot spans. And also they didn't have temporary center span supports for the spans. So this is the before. You see it's about a 22, 23-foot structure. This picture was taken by the host contractor. This is the after. And then for greater perspective, this is the after. Okay, and just for a brief description, there were about 7 people working in this corner of the building. Most of them slid down the structure or crawled around the side. Only one person had a broken hip, so it's not exactly a near miss, but it's pretty close. These guys are lucky that they lived to tell the tale another day. So you can see this is a bit of a mess. This is an example of something that we would investigate. When we have something like that happen, employers are required to report each inpatient hospitalization to us within 24 hours. If you didn't know that, that can be done through our 800 hotline. That's 800-321-OSHA, or you can contact the local OSHA office with jurisdiction. Anytime there's a worker death in a worst case scenario, that has to be reported to OSHA or also to a state OSHA jurisdiction. And state OSHA jurisdictions, I believe, are consistent with the 8-hour requirement. The DOSH representative could verify this, but that has to be done within 8 hours. So getting to the excavation and trenching portion of the presentation, did you know that, and I'm going to go through these pretty fast because we've got someone from DOSH is going to talk too. The fatality rate for excavation work is significantly higher than the general rate for construction. And I won't read this whole slide, but note that 271 workers died in trenching or excavation cave-ins from a 6-year period from 2000 to 2006. 488 of those deaths over an 8-year period resulted in, I guess, about an average of 54 per year. 68% of those fatals were in companies with fewer than 50 workers, and 46% of the deaths occurred in small companies with 10 or fewer workers. OSHA has a national emphasis program, and I have a slide on this, and Blake might follow up on this, and the CPL number is 02.00.161. And there is a compliance directive, and I think that has an additional number, which I'll reference towards the back. Some of the common things that we hear about when we go out in the field and we hear about noncompliance are that, well, it was just 5 feet deep, or someone was only in it for a minute or had limited exposure time, or that someone was in a hurry. Other things that we hear are that the trench box or the sloping was not feasible for the site. There was limited access to engineering controls, or that the utility locate was not accurate or completed. As a brief tangent on that, I once did an inspection on a site where a locate was beyond 21 days expiration, and the contractor hit the gas line while I was doing the opening with the super. That was interesting. Luckily, that it did not result in an explosion. They were able to call the fire department and resolve the situation, but that was hair-raising. You want to make sure that there's a competent person on the site to assess cave-in hazards and engineering controls. This is an after photo of a double fatality that happened on Hill Road in downtown Boise. So they do happen in cities, and in this case, this is a rescue crew, and they're trying to rescue the folks that are in this trench here. This is the before photo. It's approximately 30 minutes before a cave-in, so it's very eerie. The person that took the photo is the foreman. He happens to be one of the victims. The person in the yellow shirt in the trench was also killed. The one towards the far end, down by that Bobcat, that guy suffered permanent injuries. Or the skid steer, or the location of the skid steer, is the location where the cave-in occurred. As safety professionals looking at this situation, your alarm bell should be going off. You see vertical walls, it's 8 feet deep. There's no means of protecting these people. You should be saying, get those people out of there ASAP. Unfortunately, that didn't happen in this case, and it was a double fatality, and many families were devastated by this particular incident. And this is recent, so this is back in 2016. I have a series of 3 photos that I'm going to show you that I showed to the DTEC class to kind of put them in the perspective of what an OSHA compliance officer might be looking at if they're showing up to a site. And this is the first one, and I asked the students, well, if you're looking in this situation, what do you see? Well, you see that there isn't a ramp or a means of egress or a ladder for this person to get out. The slides may be sloughing off or not properly sloped, and this person is practically being buried by the load. So there are a lot of things that are taking place here. Also, you got someone standing up top that might be the foreman who has adequate knowledge as to what's going on. And that's going to be the first person that the compliance officer is going to want to speak with once they get that laborer out of this excavation. In here, there's some fissuring towards the right-hand side, which might be difficult to see. And the soil appears to be a relatively cohesive type, maybe a class B. And if you're not familiar with soil classification, it goes from stable rock to A being clay or very cohesive to B to C being like a sand. But as you go further into this trench or excavation, the slopes of the excavation get steeper, and the difference between trench and excavation just have to do with the width of the actual trench or excavation relative to how deep it is. The issues in this excavation are that what's patently obvious is that there's a bunch of water at its base, and it doesn't look like they have a pumping mechanism, or they may. Actually, it does look like they have a pumping mechanism to get the water out of the excavation. And so this could potentially weaken the size of the excavation and make it more susceptible to cave-in. So how do you avoid trench hazards? Well, pre-job planning is important to accident-free trenching. You want to make sure you evaluate soil conditions, construct protective systems in accordance with standard requirements, and you want to pre-plan and contact utility locate services to locate underground lines and plan for traffic control if you're in a roadway. You also want to test for low oxygen, hazardous fumes, and toxic gases, especially when you've got gasoline engine-driven equipment running. You want to provide safe access into or out of the excavation. And remember that picture where the guy's got a load that's being dumped on him. There's no ramp or ladder to get out of there. You want to provide appropriate protections if water accumulation is a problem. And you want to make sure that a competent person inspects the site daily at the start of each shift, following a rainstorm or after any other significant event that might affect the cohesiveness or potential cave-in hazards of that excavation. A competent person is an individual designated by the employer who's capable of identifying existing and predictable hazards, and they're also identifying hazardous or dangerous conditions with workers or that involve workers, and also who's authorized to take prompt corrective measures to eliminate the hazards. They have to be able to do both, identify problems and then have the authority to correct them. Under our excavation standards, the tasks performed by the competent person include classifying soil, inspecting protective systems, designing structural ramps or means of egress, monitoring water removal equipment, and conducting site inspections. There's our generic poster, which talks about the options by which a contractor can utilize to protect their employees, and what the means by which they do that is up to them. They can slope, they can shore up the trench walls with supports, or they can use a shield or a trench box. This shows the fatality and injury related data specific to trenches going from 2012 to 2017, and you can see there is a bit of an uptick in the data. And so the 2016 data does include the double fatality that happened in Boise on Hill Road. So the following slides address cave-in hazards and include photos taken from OSHA enforcement inspections. The industries addressed includes residential, commercial, and ag sites. This is an inspection I was involved with in Pocatello, Idaho. It's about 9 to 10 feet deep. There's no competent person on the site. There's no means of getting it out other than climbing on the supports there. There's the slope, or actually the spoil pile, is right on the edge here. So you can see this worker is getting out of the trench. She's like, uh-oh, the OSHA guy's here. I better get out. And so this is a different perspective. You can see that the opposite sides of the trench are vertical as well. So this is more like a hole, not just a trench. So there's a hazard of cave-in from each side, each one of the four sides of this work location. And here you can see the spoil pile, which is significant, which is right on the edge of this trench. And that spoil pile was about 4 to 5 feet high. It was pretty high, and it was right on the edge. This is another excavation that was on the same site because they were installing, I believe, residential sewer. And it's about 8 feet deep, vertical walls, it's spoil piles right on the edge. Pretty dangerous. You do not want to go in there. You don't want to send your kids in there. You know, this is a bad situation. This is another site that I inspected that looked in compliance from a distance because they had a shoe or a box. But when I got closer, I noticed that it was on about a 3.5 foot ledge on the base of the trench, which is a no-no as far as OSHA requirements. These trench boxes need to be at least 2 feet from the bottom because you can have material slide underneath it, potentially causing a cave-in hazard for folks in the trench. This is a double fatality. That's about 6.5 to 7 feet deep. So they don't have to be terribly deep. In this case, there was an irrigation pipe that was being placed in the trench or the excavation. You could see, looking at the vista, this is actually in the middle of a field in Idaho. This is another fatality. This trench is 10 feet deep. Certainly not something that you want to walk into. You can see the spoils right on the edge. In this case, they were installing a drainage pipe, and H2A workers were being utilized on the site. This is near Star, Idaho. If you're not familiar with the Boise area, Star is about a half hour from where I'm broadcasting here from downtown Boise. This is an agricultural site, and in this case, a worker got buried up to his chest. And you can see the trench, or the trench or excavation here, is not terribly deep, but that still can cause a significant problem just because the weight of the soil, once it compresses a worker, it can stop them from breathing and also can stop their circulation. Issue here is that a worker was in a situation about 7 feet deep, and there were cave-in hazards, and that he was working underneath of an overhang, and that there was some fissuring, as indicated by the slide, right by the work location. Work outside of a box when there's an established engineering control on a trench or excavation site, unfortunately, is something that our compliance staff doesn't counter on a regular basis. This is just a shot showing you a perspective of an OSHA compliance officer, and I will tell you that because of our directive, when compliance staff see someone in a trench like 5 or 6 feet deep, they are obligated to make entry and assess what's going on. So if a compliance officer from OSHA sees this type of situation, they are going to make entry and just assess the compliance with that situation. Same thing for here. It's someone in a trench. It looks like about 5 or 6 feet deep. Looks like there's some benching towards the left-hand side. I can't tell what's going on with the right-hand side of this photo, but the compliance officer is going to want to make an assessment as to what's going on here and speak to the competent person for the site. Issue here is that someone's working outside of a box. I can't tell how deep it is from the perspective because I got this photo on the internet, but just note that, work outside of a box is a potential issue dependent on the depth of the excavation of the trench at that particular location. In this case, there is inadequate protective measures for trench access. This was a photo taken by one of our Boise compliance staff. In this case, the trench was greater than 10 feet deep, and there's only one jack there, which is insufficient for that type of setup. In this situation, there's a 7 foot deep area where rebar was being installed. The foreman and the competent person were in view of what was going on. And so that would have been the first. Once the compliance officer got someone out of a hazardous situation, the first thing they would want to do is speak to the foreman and CP about their training and their hazard identification for the site. This was an operation that initiated what's called a safety stand down in trenching and excavation. This is actually on one of our partner sites, and to their credit, they observed what was going on, and they didn't like the sloping for the operation towards the far side of the photo. So they stopped all activity on the site. They had a stand down with their people. They talked about trenching and excavation requirements, and they were proactive. And we would encourage that type of activity with our partners, especially with folks in the community. It's difficult to see here, but there is an electrical line that runs above the cubicle there. And we would encourage you that whenever you're doing site activity, that you not just look down, but you also look up and see if there's any primary power lines or things that might cause a path to ground based on the type of operation that you're doing. It's another inspection that I did, and in this case, the contractor was lucky they were hand digging because they didn't do utility locates prior to the beginning of the job, and they almost broke a gas line, which is indicated with the photo inset here. And then there's a power line that runs adjacent to this hole, and they didn't know that location either prior to starting work, so they got lucky. That could have been much worse if they were using their power equipment. On the same site, they tore through all of the irrigation lines on the sprinkler system for this property, so this site was a bit of a mess. This is an example of trench shielding done right, and then you got some workers in the base of the trench or the excavation, and they're properly protected with a means of egress. That's fantastic. Here's the looks of shoring done right. And sloping. This sloping is for Class C soil for 34 degrees or a ratio of 1.5 to 1. And I haven't seen these site guides in person, but aside from this photo, but I'm sure that you can retrieve them if you find them useful. So some regulations dealing with trenching and excavation citations are that our requirements require that employees in excavation be protected by cave-ins by adequate protective systems, that stairways and ladders be utilized if you're 4 feet deep or more, and that has to be provided for every 25 feet of lateral travel. And as I'm going through these, I'm relaying federal OSHA requirements, so there might be some differences with DOSH. I leave it to the DOSH people to explain that, but I'm just providing this as general information. Also note that daily inspections are required of excavations, and also you have to move spoil or the dirt that comes out of the trench and excavation at least 2 feet back from the edge. Our inspection priority are that we look at imminent danger situations first. So that hill road, the before photo, that's an imminent danger. People in an 8-foot deep trench, no protective measures, vertical walls. We need to get on that right away. That's the first thing that we're going to take a look at. From there, we look at fatalities and catastrophes. Catastrophes are OSHA speak for an incident that results in 3 or more inpatient hospitalizations. From there, we look at complaints and referrals. And then the last thing we look at are program inspections, which are to a lesser degree with trenches and excavations because it's a little difficult to predict. These are our citations and penalties, and I won't read you the whole slide, but just know that willful is the worst. Willful is when an employer intentionally and knowingly commits a violation with plain indifference to the law, and those penalties can be up to $145,000. And serious violations, which is the most common, or where there's a substantial probability of death or serious physical harm, and those penalties can be up to $14,500. There are multiple reduction factors that go into penalty assessments. That's a topic for another day. The current NEP on trenching and excavation has this line here about compliance officers initiating inspections under the NEP whenever they observe an open trench or excavation, regardless of whether or not a violation is observed. So again, if our compliance staff sees something like this ongoing, they're going to make entry. We initiated a compliance directive in July 2021, which updated our procedures and reviews how we take documentation, photos, sketches, samples, measurements, how we analyze employee exposure, and also what we look for within excavation protection programs. What we would expect to see in excavation protection programs, and this is discussed in the directives, this 02-00-165, are that you have a safety and health program that goes into accident prevention, that your safety program addresses excavation hazards, that you have a system to track compliance in Subpart P or OSHA excavations, which include periodic inspections. You have a disciplinary system to make sure that people comply with work rules. It addresses training, who the competent person for the job site is going to be, and any engineering and assessment of near misses and injuries that occur. So, this is an example of just a good picture, right? You've got a box in the trench with a way to get out, spoils well back, and this is from our e-tool, which is available online. And that's basically my portion of the presentation in trenching excavation. And before I handed it back off to Blake for his discussion on emphasis programs, let me get my... I just want to say, if you have any questions on the Boise specific compliance assistance stuff, you just send me an email. That's gerson.adam@dol.gov. Remember, Blake is Washington State, so he's your area director. So stuff dealing with jurisdiction in your state, you know, certainly reach out to him. Blake's an excellent resource. I've worked with Blake for years now, so you're lucky to have him. So, and if you want to be on that that Mobile 5 demo, just send me an email, or if you want to be on the newsletter distribution, just let me know. And with that, I'm going to let Blake take back over. Okay.
Fabulous. Thank you, Adam.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to touch real quick on just with national emphasis programs. These are programs that generally allow OSHA to conduct inspections on a programmed basically list without getting a complaint. And one of the ones that Adam talked about today is the trench NEP, which has been around for a while now. And on sites where federal OSHA has jurisdiction, that means that anytime a compliance officer observes any trench open where work is being done, they can open an inspection. This was a required adoption by the states. I don't know that DOSH quite does that, and they're going to talk about what their trenching, I think what they're working on after this. And then the other new NEP that just came out is our heat NEP, and we're still getting some guidance on this, but basically certain industries will be covered by this NEP. For federal OSHA, it does cover the post office, postal, and sort of package carriers, which is new for us. We haven't had any emphasis programs that specifically would cover the post office before. And as far as it does cover construction, that will be more probably based on observation or when we find out there is construction on, but this is on, like I said, military bases, federal sites, places where we cover. So there could be programmed unannounced heat inspections, and this is triggered when the local weather services announces a heat advisory or basically it'll trigger when we're kind of told by the weather service that it's going to be over a certain temperature or the heat index is certain. But I hope to find out more and get more guidance on this. It did just come out. If you want to read the NEP, if you just Google OSHA heat NEP, you can find it. DOSH already has a rule that covers heat, so they're a little ahead of federal OSHA, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong with that to the next speakers, but I do believe that they already have more requirements on dealing with excessive heat than federal OSHA does. So that's just the two things I just wanted to touch on because that's a new thing. So if anybody has any questions for Adam or I, if there's time, I know we've got DOSH, or we can do that later at the end after DOSH if there's time. But thanks.
Thank you very much, Blake. Appreciate that. And we are going to shift to Eric Smith. Eric, we appreciate you joining in today, and we are looking forward to hearing some of the information that the state has been drumming up regarding a rescue for trenching excavation plans. Thank you, sir, for attending today. Mr. Eric Smith.
You're muted.
Oh, there we go. Sure. Can I share my screen?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great to hear from OSHA and see you folks. Good stuff. So somehow, wherever the screen share thing is, there we go. And which one do I want? So I know we've been here for a bit already. So kind of want to just roll through it fairly quickly. I'm Eric Smith with Labor and Industries, Division of Occupational Safety and Health. Most of you know me. If you don't, hello. So with trenching and excavation, we know in Washington State we've had a couple of fatalities in the last, I guess it's going back to 2016 and 2020 now. With those, there are issues with providing of rescue and planning. And management wanted to more clearly address language related to rescue, but also ensuring or helping employers to ensure that trenches are safe prior to employees going into them. So we came up with a rulemaking project, and this is our website. Everyone knows that, lni.wa.gov, go to safety, rulemaking activity. And I kind of walk through it so everyone knows where we're at. Slowly, because it's a long ways down. So if people wonder why things take a long time, it's because we have a lot of rules we're working on. We have a specific page for trenching, rescue, and excavation plan rulemaking. There's some background information on that, kind of a little bit longer than what I just mentioned. We have meetings and timelines. We've already had 3 stakeholder meetings on that. And we also have Kevin Walder as a regulations analyst. He's with us today. He'll give us a status of where we are and where we're going with upcoming meetings and all of that. But specifically, I'd like to run through quick today is the draft documents, and this is the latest draft that we have. The discussion from 2022 is the one I'm going to look at, though not through the website because of the way it formats. I'll look at one I've already downloaded to my desktop and go that way. If I can figure out how to share that slide. So there we go. Hopefully everyone can see this.
We got it.
All right, you see a PDF of 650. So we know with Washington, we not only is some of our codes different, but our code numbers are different as well. We know trenching excavation starts in section 650 of chapter 155. In 650, we added 2 new definitions, definition of emergency. And where we get the definition from is our confined space standard, from OSHA's confined space standard, and also to some degree the dictionary. And we always find it important to define words where a dictionary may give us a lot of different definitions for it. So we did add emergency in there. And again, I'm going through this fairly quickly to get everyone on their day, but happy to answer questions. Another definition that we added was rescue. And that came from our confined space standard, though slightly modified because it talks about permit space. And obviously we're not talking about a confined space with a trench, but slightly reworded. And federal OSHA's confined space standard, and to some degree also the dictionary. So where we see it underlined would be new, or it isn't underlined, at least in this section, it's existing language. And as Adam had mentioned, a trench excavation has a specific definition in the standard. This isn't new, it's been there for a long time. Much of what we're going to talk about is going to be specific to trench excavations, and that differs from just an excavation. Okay. but that's not changing. Just wanted to highlight that. So section 655 is the general requirements that apply to all excavations. We can see that none of that is changing 1 through 12. It's been there as it's been written, I think, since 1991 in Washington, which substantially similar, though not exact, substantially similar to OSHA's standard. And we can see as we go down, we do have a new number 13, or potentially a new number 13, and we have some language over here off to the side. So number 13 will apply to all excavations. And like I mentioned, management wanted to address rescue and procedures for an employer to follow prior to employee entry. And the standard of the language we're looking at is you must plan for and provide or make arrangements in advance with locally available services to provide prompt, safe removal or rescue of employees in the event of an emergency. And where that language came from is in a couple of different places that are currently in chapter 155 now. So 155 currently has prompt, safe removal from elevated locations and trenches and excavations, and also under accident prevention program, proper actions to take in the event of emergencies. Largely, it's already there, but we wanted to make it more specific to excavations instead of piece it here and there, bring it down into that standard. Okay. So number 14 is all new as well. Again, don't worry about the colors, just number 14 is all new, and we can see that it's specific to trench excavations. The reason why we're looking at more specific to trenches versus all excavations is, and why the standard differentiates between them, is proximity to the hazard and an ability to escape. So if you can imagine being in an excavation that's the size of a high-rise building in Seattle, yeah, there's potential there for a cave-in, but proximity to it, being distance away, is less, and the ability to escape is greater in an excavation than it is a trench that's 2 feet wide, because you're right next to the sides of the trench. So we made this specific to trenches because and also with the fatalities that we've had. And there's several other incidents in the last several years where trenches had collapsed relating to resorting into hospitalizations, and also the rescuers were in some cases injured and exposed as well, but not so much for an excavation, but specific to a trench. So you must develop and implement a written work plan for any trench excavation into which an employee may enter and where a protective system is required under 657-1A. So 657-1A is the requirement for a protective system in all excavations. Then the work plan must. So this is a written plan. Now again, it says written, so it's just like the fall protection work plan. Nothing that says it can't be digital, right? The work plan must identify all trench excavations where a protective system is required. That goes back to the current requirement to provide that protective system in all excavations. It's already there. Identify the classification of soil and rock deposits. We know the standard currently requires competent person to classify the soil, A, B, C, or other. Method of protecting underground installations when the trench excavation is open. That's a current requirement in 655. Describe method of protection from surface encumbrances. Again, it's all there. I don't want to go through and read through each one, but there are some of these where certainly many of you have had a trench before and you didn't have a surface encumbrance, or there wasn't an underground installation. So in those cases, that provision wouldn't apply. There's no need to protect employee from something that isn't there. Type of protective system to be provided. We know we can slope, bench, shore, or shield based on soil type, right? Procedure for installation or removal of a protective system that protects employees from cave-in, structural collapses, or from being struck by members of the protective system. We know that shoring systems are designed to be installed, and employers or manufacturers have instructions installation from outside of the trench, not inside of the trench putting them in, but from outside. Frequency of inspections. We know that there's competent person requirements for inspections now, each day and as required, right? Method of protection for workers from cave-ins when entering or exiting the areas protected by shields. Why is this specific to shields? Because the standard currently requires protecting employees entering or exit shields. Doesn't say anything about shoring, because shoring can be spaced based on depth and soil type. Shields are a little bit different. Shoring holds it up, shield is just that. Method of protecting workers in a trench excavation from loose soil, rock, or equipment that could pose a hazard by rolling or falling in. That's the spoils pile 2 feet back, or otherwise. It could be more, right? Method of protection from hazards associated with water accumulation, if any. Describe the safe means of egress from trench excavations. And what's a lot different from number 13 above, which is the general requirement for rescue for all excavations. This is specific to trenches. You'd be surprised where we got this to, right? Describe actions to be taken to ensure prompt, safe removal of rescue from workers in the event of a cave-in. And your description must include procedures for contacting rescue and emergency services, removing or rescuing workers from the excavations, providing necessary emergency services to rescued workers, and preventing unauthorized persons from attempting a rescue. These are specific to a trench that would need to be determined before entry. And we've had cave-ins in the past where 911 was relied upon. Only 911 fire services didn't have the ability to perform a rescue, and they didn't even have access to the site or even where the work was taking place. And we know if obviously if there's a cave-in, then time is of the essence. So this would all need to be planned prior to entry. Be available on site for inspection by the department. And C is new to this. Prior to permitting employees into any trench excavation where a protective system is required, the employer must ensure employees are trained and instruct on the items described in this plan. Okay, and we have kind of where we get those sources of their management's responsibility to provide training and training of employees. So that's the idea of the plan and where we're going with it. I'm going through it fairly fast because I know it's been over an hour. And so what I can do now is Kevin Walder, a regulations analyst, done a lot of work with all the rules that we work on, but also here he can give an update as where we are with it, where we're looking at being, and next step for your all involvement.
All right, thanks, Eric. My name is Kevin Walder. Like Eric said, I'm an administrative regulations analyst with DOSH. So my role basically is to shepherd rulemaking projects through the administrative process until they are adopted and become effective. In Washington, rulemaking is a 3-part process. We have a preliminary stage where we file a CR 101, and that's where we do the bulk of the drafting with stakeholders, and that's where we've been with this project. We filed the CR 101 back in June, so we're coming up on almost a year. And over that time, we've had 3 public stakeholder meetings and also multiple opportunities where we sent out a draft rule and requested feedback via our Gov Delivery email service. And over that time, these various iterations of the draft, we've kind of massaged the language. At this point, we are pretty confident that we're going to be moving into the CR 102 phase. That's the second of 3, where we officially file a proposal. There are still opportunities for public stakeholder involvement and comment. After that, we will announce public hearings once we file the CR 102 proposal. But right now, we're looking at moving towards the 102 phase by the fall of this year. However, prior to that, we do want to hold one more public stakeholder meeting this summer. It's going to be in late June. We will probably put out an announcement next week on that. I put a link to our rulemaking webpage and Eric and my email. If you have any questions, you can sign up for email updates. You can contact us directly anytime. So there will be one more public stakeholder meeting in later June. It's going to be a hybrid meeting, at least right now. Tentatively, we're planning on doing it in person with the option to attend virtually. As we all know, anything can change, but right now that's the plan. So we'll meet in late June, get any further comments we have on the draft, and then we'll be looking towards finalizing that language and putting forth a proposal by this fall, perhaps even earlier than that, but certainly by this fall. So I think that's pretty much where we're at. Again, you have my contact information, Eric's contact information, and the trenching, rescue, and excavation rulemaking webpage link up there. So please feel free to contact us if you have any questions or comments. And aside from that, if anyone has any questions right now, I'm happy to answer.
I do have a question for Eric Smith, and maybe you could answer that as well. Is on the rescue plan, and I know, Eric, we talked about this at the University of Washington trenching training a few weeks back, but does this particular rescue plan have to be incorporated not only in the corporate accident prevention plan, but also site-specific plan? And is that the only location it should be located? Or is there other means of documentation that may be required from the state?
So, okay, too many buttons to click there. So the plan is essentially standalone as it's written now, just like a fall protection work plan and a demolition plan. It is standalone. Now, an employer could incorporate that into their accident prevention program, whether it's site specific or general. They could incorporate it in that if they wanted to. The difference being is the excavation work plan is site specific. An accident prevention program doesn't necessarily have to be site specific. So the employer would need to determine what it is that they're actually doing, how they want to incorporate it, the best fits them. So to answer your question, it could be any of those, but it would be up to the employer to determine the best way to do it.
Got it. And then one other question to follow up with that: had the state considered, because there's a national emphasis program, and obviously I think Adam shared this statistic, but you're 112% more likely to suffer a fatality in the third most dangerous industry, said construction. Implementing something similar to a confined space entry permit, which would ensure that users of trenches, even for the course of the day, have covered the items that are necessary for safe trenching operations. Has that been something that's been considered, or has it not? Thank you.
To some degree, yeah. And we saw with a lot of these where I referenced back to Chapter 809, confined space. We are incorporating a lot of those same confined space, not only language, but also requirements, just making them specific to excavations. To require a specific permit, I'm not sure if we've really discussed that, but requiring a written plan largely does the same thing. And a lot of those elements are the same as confined space. And we know that a trench isn't a confined space, right? Good. But a lot of those are the same, and we've applied that same rationale and language here. But a specific permit like a confined space, we haven't really looked at that, no.
Excellent. Thank you for that information, and having my finger on the pulse with many civil contractors throughout the community. Some folks have been discussing possibly implementing this on a more employer higher level type situation to ensure that those folks are doing what they need to do. So again, above and beyond DOSH and OSHA. But this is fantastic information, and glad to see the state pushing this forward.
If anybody else has other questions or comments, feel free to ask.
Questions, folks, please. Eric, Blake, and also Adam are here for you to answer any questions. We'd love to hear from you. All right, folks. Well, we really appreciate our speakers coming in today and sharing some very valuable information. We have our next virtual safety summit on June 8th, 9 a.m. Same